Today's first reading comes from Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 20. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Our second reading comes from Isaiah, chapter 58, verses 9 through 12. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, Here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, in the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, if you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom be as the noonday. And the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your desire in scorched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters do not fall. And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called repairer, restorer of the streets to dwell. This is the word of God for the people of God. So the readings for today, they lead us to two fundamental questions of life. Who are we and what is our purpose? So often we go through life, we go through the things we need to do, we go through our job, we go through taking care of our children, and we wonder, what was I meant for? What was I put on earth for? These questions haunt many people. They haunted me too. Even though you have a good job that you're good at, you wonder, what is my purpose? Thinking along. So you wonder, what did God put me on this earth? Some of the people that Matthew's writing to today in the scriptures, they're wondering also. They're wondering about the same questions that are facing congregations today. Matthew lived in a time of theological turmoil, social tension. They wanted the church to be just like society. Some of the issues that Matthew faced and his people, we face now. Many people are questioning our biblical beliefs. They say that we have to change, that our biblical beliefs have to change in order to match what's out in society. And we can't do that. This is what our entire faith is based on. Everything we believe is in here. We can't change. But people don't believe that. They think that we have to accommodate society. But what they don't realize is that we cannot change because God's word never changes. God never changes his mind. What was given to us thousands of years ago is still true. We've got two questions. Sometimes you just got to deal. The first answer to the first question is, who are we? And we're the people of one book, the Bible. That's our entire basis for being and living and guiding. This makes us different from everybody in the world. Only Christians read the Bible. Nobody else does. It should guide everything that we do. When we read the Bible, when we live by the Bible, it's called having a biblical view, not a worldview. And there's 5 different things that are tied into that. When we have a biblical worldview, we have to worry about our values. We ask ourselves, what are our priorities? Am I focused on the good of other people, or am I focused on what's good for me? Are my priorities God's priorities? Those are the things that should shape our values. And once we've got our values understood, we move on to our behaviors, because our values shape our behavior. What are the choices that I make? Do all of my choices make God happy? Do I make my choices based on what the world expects me to do, or based on what God has told me to do? Once we start acting in accordance to Scriptures, we can start shaping the culture that we're in. We wonder, what impact am I having on the culture around me? If we're like everybody else in the culture, we have no impact, because we're just like everybody else. But if we have a biblical view of the world, if we shape all our values and all our behaviors on what God has told us to do, we can have an impact. We can change the world. Our children, once they have a biblical worldview, they no longer think about bullying anybody or pushing somebody down. They start thinking about lifting other people up. And I'll tell you, that's completely different to every other kid in school. That's how it starts shaping our entire culture. Our 2 readings address this issue directly. And then as we go through our life, and as we pick up our biblical worldview and we start shaping the culture around us, we can look back on the things that we do. We reflect and we adjust. Am I doing exactly what God has asked me to do? If I'm not, I can adjust. If I am, we just keep moving forward. We keep doing exactly what He's told us to do. We should constantly be assessing our actions against our biblical beliefs and say, are they in line? Or are they going down parallel roads with a mile between them? In our reading from Matthew today, Jesus tells us that we must be different from the world. We must stand out, and we must add to the world. Changing the world for better. Just like salt and butter change the taste of the popcorn, we are to change the world. We're just supposed to add flavor. We're supposed to add life to the world. Jesus is telling us that we need to shape the culture that's around us. We need to change culture. Our reading from Isaiah also echoes what Jesus says last week in the Beatitudes, and what Jesus is telling us today. Hear the word of God from Isaiah 58, verse 10. And if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like noonday. Isaiah is telling us here that if we do things based on the Bible, contrary to what society expects us to do, we're going to have a big impact on society. We'll stand out so much that the darkness out there won't stand a chance. We'll be able to bring God's light to the darkness, to the darkest corners. This is Isaiah's way of saying that our actions, guided and directed by the Bible, will change the entire world. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, Jesus gives us another part of the answer to the first question. Who are we as Christians? He says, you are the salt of the earth. Now, salt in Jesus' time was different. It was very valuable because it took a lot of effort to make salt. It was scarce. That's why it was so valuable. But Jesus isn't just talking about the high monetary value of salt. He's talking about what salt does. Salt
has the power to change everything. When we want something to taste better, we add salt. That popcorn, the first kids who tried it, they were being generous. And they said, oh yeah, it tastes good. But then we heard it tastes like corn. When you're eating popcorn, you don't taste corn, you taste butter and salt. And that's what they tasted when they finally got the good stuff. That's what Jesus and Isaiah are telling us. Bring the good stuff to the people. Don't let them live the life that they are living now. When we share the good news of Jesus' life and resurrection, we become the salt of the earth. We can flavor and change everything. That's what we're called to do. Now, are we all prepared to do that right now? Maybe not. Some of us are ready to go out there and proclaim the good news to everybody we meet. Some of us are a little more timid, a little bit more shy, and we're not there yet. Some Christians, on the other hand, might believe that it's not my job to go share the good news. That's your job. We hired you, Pastor. You go do it. Ed's shaking his head. Thank you, Ed. No, where in the Bible does it say, Pastor, go share the good news? You other guys just hang back. It doesn't. Through the Old Testament, the New Testament, and Jesus himself says, go and make disciples. At New Hope United Methodist Church in De Pere, Wisconsin, where I first started preaching before I was a pastor, they said, we don't want Jim talking about evangelism anymore. He can't preach it. We don't want to hear it. It makes us feel guilty. It reminds us of what we're not doing. Now, you know, my intent is not to make anybody feel guilty. It's just to remind you of what we're called to do. And I have to. Before I was even a pastor, God made me be an evangelist. He said, this is what you have to do. Everything I read pointed me in the same direction. You need to go and tell people. So I did. We need to make sure that we sow the seeds of faith. We may not see the results, but we need to do the sowing. And this brings us to question number 2. What is the purpose of God's church if not to spread the Word of God? What are we here for? Jim's eyebrows raised. Really, what are we here for? I love starting out my week on Sundays. Worship is the way to start. That's part of our purpose, to worship and thank the God that created us. But the other part is to spread the good news every way we can. Now, nobody wants to eat unsalted popcorn. Nobody likes it. No matter who you ask, all that stuff is good for is for packing boxes and feeding birds. That's all it's good for. If the salty, buttery popcorn is what we want to eat, why would we want people to have the good news? If we have the thing that makes our life so much better, why don't we want to share it? What's holding us back? If salvation through the sacrifice of Jesus is good enough for us, it's good for everybody. But what if we don't share the good news? What if we keep it bottled up here at church? And we only open it up on Sundays? Jesus tells us we've lost our saltiness. We've let the saltiness go to waste. I would never want anybody to feel guilty, but here's what James, the brother of Jesus, said. He told anyone who would listen, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. Now, James isn't saying that you'll no longer be saved, but we know this is what we have to do. I know that I have to. That's my purpose. I truly believe we all have to share our testimony. We have to do it as soon as we can. Because Jesus tells us in verse 13, he says, You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Now we wonder, how can salt lose its saltiness? Because in Jesus' day, it was made from the Dead Sea. They had to dry it out. And if you didn't use it quick enough, it lost its saltiness. Same thing with our testimony and our stories. If we don't use it, it starts to lose its relevance. The longer you wait before you share your story, your testimony, the less relevant it becomes, because it's like 20 years old. But God does something in our lives every day, and that's what we need to share. Salt that no longer serves its purpose should just be thrown out so someone else can get traction. Maybe we can help somebody else through our story. And Jesus told us before what happens when we don't do what we're supposed to do. In the bulletin, it tells you to read Matthew 25. That's where Jesus talks about the good and faithful servant who did what he was supposed to do, and the lazy servant. We all want to be that good and faithful servant, so that when we get up and finally meet Jesus, he's there hugging us and saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's where all of us want to be. None of us wants to be that lazy servant. The theme of who we are as Christians and what we're supposed to do is reinforced in verses 14 through 16, where Matthew adapts what Isaiah told us. Where Isaiah describes the vocation of Israel, what Israel was supposed to do. God told Isaiah, "I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand." He never leaves us alone. "And I will keep you, and I will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles." Back in the Old Testament, God is telling the Hebrews, "I want you to save even the Gentiles." So evangelism isn't something new that we just cooked up to fill churches. It's in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and we get it over and over again. Jesus tells us in no uncertain terms in Matthew 28, "Go, therefore, and make disciples." Just go. Don't think about it. Don't wait for someone else to do it. Just go and get it done. Throughout the Bible, in Isaiah 58, Isaiah 47, Isaiah 56, and in our reading from Matthew, we see it over and over and over again. We have the power to get the good news out. And if we don't, nobody else will. Later in our reading from Matthew, in verses 14 and 15, Jesus tells us, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden." No one can hide the fact that we're saved. We're different. We've changed. We just got to make sure that we don't hide it. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand so everybody can see it, so it can light the darkest corners of the room. Now this is where Jesus switches how from salt makes life better to the purpose of light to illuminate a dark room. And that's the great thing about a candle or any type of light. The darker the room, the less light you need to light the place up. I think this world's pretty dark right now with the news we hear about abortion and everything else. It seems like we're just sliding farther and farther. Let your lights out to light those dark corners. And if you put your candle as high as it can go, it can reach the darkest corners. Now here's a fun fact. And it tells us the power of Jesus' message. Back in 1941, scientists at Columbia University, they demonstrated that the human eye can see a flickering candle at a distance of 30 miles. When it's pitch black, you can see one candle 30 miles away. And then more currently, they found out that a 100-watt bulb can be seen 60 miles away, if it's dark enough. Now let's factor in the power of discipleship. If you can see a 100-watt bulb 60 miles away, what if there was somebody preaching the good news every couple feet? And then 30 miles in every direction from that, somebody was sharing the good news every couple feet. would look like this. How fast would that light spread? How much darkness could possibly be there if everybody a couple feet away from us started sharing the good news? The whole world would be filled in no time. We need to make sure that we don't put our candles under a basket. That doesn't make any sense.
Click. Rocky. Click.
Because the basket's going to burn, right? Who would ever want to light a light, a flashlight, or a light bulb, or a candle, and hide it? It doesn't make sense. Why would Jesus save us if he didn't want us to spread the news? Right, Chris? Right. He tells us in verse 16, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who's in heaven. When we do what Jesus asks us to do in verse 16, and let our light shine for the entire world, it eliminates darkness and it glorifies our Father, because we tell everybody, here's what I'm like now that I've been saved. Here's what I was like before I was saved. I was awful, I was nasty, either I was a drunk or I was a drug addict, or I did this or I did that, but now that Jesus saved me, I'm not like that anymore. The darkness is gone and nothing but light. Jesus encourages all his followers to bring light to the darkness, so that everybody can feel the warmth and the radiance of his good news, to know that they're saved. Archbishop William Temple tells us, the church is the only organization on earth that exists for those who are not its members. Wow, right? We exist for those people out there who haven't yet heard the good news. That's our whole purpose. To come here, to hear scriptures, to lift up our voices, to thank God, and then to take that candle out there. Not blow it out on the way out the door. Is this task for everybody? Can everybody share their faith now? Not yet. Not yet. But by your actions, you can do the same thing. Candles light up a room just by being there. Do candles say anything? No. But they get rid of darkness just by being there. Same thing with Christians. Just by being in a dark situation and acting like a Christian, you change that area. Salt doesn't talk, but it improves whatever it's in just by being. So if you can't share your faith, at least be a Christian.